people that didn't really appreciate him, as much as they did at his first job. This is the man that my mother married. There's so much more to be said about my mother than just, she done all right for a girl. Joan felt like when she was at the church service that they held for my mother, that Father had given his eulogy of her, his parishioner, and that she felt pressured to just keep it short and sweet. But there's so much more to be said for my mother and my dad than that. There's three things would like to say about her. There's things that the family would know, her brothers and sisters and her friends when she was growing up, and that Joan would know from visiting her and doing things with her. But there's things that only I would know because I spent, my whole life there at the house. For 10 years before she died, we would go biking together, and we didn't follow the rules. You're not supposed to straddle each other on the bike path, but a lot of times we would, so you're supposed to stay to the right. A lot of times we would straddle each other, and that's when we did like a lot of talking about what was going on with each other. There's lots of times we talk, and there's things that I know about her that I would like to share with her family and her friends. One of them, there's three things in particular. When we went to Washington, D.C. on a bus tour, we had an excellent tour guide, one who seemed to know everybody, like at all the stops they made, and made arrangements for our group to pass over the other people and who wouldn't have to stand in line. He would talk to them and have our group go ahead of him. He was an excellent tour guide, and we saw a lot of Washington. Everybody has their favorite things about Washington, D.C., the things that you can see in the museums and just the statues. It's a city full of memorials to servicemen. But we had our free time too. They would gather as a group, and then they gave you free time to go see different things that were on the tour. And I had Joan look it up in the internet, and it's in a place called the Park Full of Statues, Statue Park. There's a picture, or no, rather a sculpture. It's a permanent part of a permanent display. It wasn't like a museum, like at the Smithsonian. Sometimes they just have temporary ones. It's a permanent part of the display outdoors. And we came around a corner looking at other things, and she stopped and she saw this statue. It's a simple statue. It's just a picture, or rather, I keep saying picture, but sculpture of a man seated on a chair, It's just life size. It's not larger than life like a lot of other statues there in Washington. And he's leaning intently over his radio. It's one of the big old-fashioned types of radios, as big as a cabinet, you know. And she stood there for the longest time, and I didn't say anything like, well, let's move on to something else or something like that. She stood there for about almost an hour, just trembling, because, you know, that was her favorite of all the other statues and things. There's the Lincoln Memorial and the Smithsonian, all these other things to see, the Iwo Jima flag memorial and all these other things. But she stood there for a long, long time and just saying, kind of with a trembling voice, it says, that's how it was when we were growing up. It's just like, this was before television, you know. It just reminded her so much of her father, just leaning real intently over his radio. That's the only contact they had with the outside, you know. Outside world was listened to, you know, there were shows and music on the radio, but there was also news, and it was always bad news. She just pictured, you know, that she stood there trembling for the longest time, and just kind of said it over and over again. That's how it was. That's how, you know, even in the, you know, she would save up her tip money and so forth, and attend the theater, the movies. But even the movies, they were escapist movies, a lot, entertainment. But then in between the movies, they had newsreels back then. I'm speaking like to the Jones grandchildren, especially, and to trying to let them know about their great-grandmother and how it was like growing up at the times, you know, the life and times of Irene Rissinger. You know, you would go to the movies, but in between the movies there was always like these horrible newsreels, you know, stories of, if it wasn't of the war, if it was, you know, stories of the war in which millions of people were being killed. There was stories about people and how there was and how they were during what they call the Great Depression. Like that was what her, you know, why she was just wanted to stand there for the longest time and just trembling, saying that's just like how it was. And the people would, when there wasn't any television, that was all that they could see was like, you know, the radio. The radio was a big piece of furniture. It wasn't like a little, you know, transistor or something like that. They got their news, and the president would get on there and would have a news conference. He would give them what he called a fireside chat, and very often it just told about the troubles that people were going through in America, and that was before the war. The man is listening for some good news. The man in the by the radio, and the statue was listening for some good news. There never was any good news, was there, Mom? Grandma? Our grandma? There never really was any good news, was there, Grandpa? Grandma? There wasn't any good news. Just think of, like, the young people today. Joan's grandchildren are going through school now, and then they'll be entering high school. When she left high school, there was a war going on. Everyone that she seemed to know had to go off.